This is the Chancellor's Report from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. Featuring Mark Money, Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And here's your host, WUWM General Manager, David Lee.
Thank you for joining us for the UWM Chancellor's Report here on 89.7 WUWM. I'm David Lee, General Manager of the station, and I'm here today with UWM Chancellor Mark Money. Hi, Mark.
Good morning.
Our guests today are Ann Basting, Director of UWM Center for 21st Century Studies, and student Russell Starlack, the UWM Economic Development Fellow at the Metropolitan Milwaukee Fair Housing Council. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having us.
Good to be here.
We're so excited to have you. So before we get started, let's sort of frame this up for our listeners. We're going to talk about the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's Story Experience program, which was the winner of the President's and Chancellor's Challenge Fund, a seed grant program developed in partnership with the Johnson Controls Foundation, UWM, and Marquette University. The initial round of grants focused on poverty, its root causes, and its subsequent effects on members of Milwaukee's various communities. So, this is an incredibly exciting conversation. And Mark, let's get you in here. Tell us about this crosstown partnership, how to get started.
Well, thanks, David. You set the stage really well, and I'll just add a few things. It does go back to actually before UWM was involved, Marquette and Johnson Controls, but also American Family were some of the original founders, and they looked at different areas of applied research. And prior to this, there was a racial justice and equity orientation. And then during the pandemic, Mike Lovell and I spoke. Mike's the president of Marquette and good friend of mine. And we talked about the collaborative power of two universities, the two large universities in this area, with the Research One focus that we've got and the community engagement orientation coming together. And so what we decided was, let's take a look at something that's collaborative, that requires that we have not only faculty from our various institutions, but really engage students and make this a learning experience all the way around. So the seed grant was meant to take advantage of really existing programs to accelerate them with impact. So if you think about research, what's the way that we can truly have impact on the most vexing issues, and what is greater both locally and really globally than poverty and its impact. So that's really a little further background on what this is about. And so today we call it the President's and Chancellor's Crosstown Challenge, and it really does, as you know, focus on competition to bring these teams together. And there are, in fact, 3 different projects that we're all receiving funding. And just to give you a flavor of those, we're going to focus today, obviously, on the Great Story Fellow program, but I just want to mention a couple of others so you get a flavor of what's going on to address poverty. Expanding access to telemental health services for young adults living in poverty in Milwaukee. That's a second project. And then the third one is healing adversity and trauma through conversation and hope. And so we work with community partners, as you'll hear about in all these different projects. Back to you, David.
So as Mark, as you sort of describe it, it has given me a little bit of like flavors of some of the things that Ann and I have maybe schemed about or I've heard about throughout the years that we've gotten to know each other. So Ann, can you tell us a little bit more about this, and why should many of our listeners care about this incredible partnership?
Well, the partnership, first of all, thanks again. We're so happy to have this funding, and also glad that you shared a little bit about the other groups, because to me, one of the great things here is also the collective impact by, we talk to the other groups who were also working in this area, and that's enriched our own work in storying. The average Milwaukeean, I think, would be fascinated to know that the humanities are part of the solution. I think the humanities and the arts and sort of social sciences get skipped over a lot because we're like, we'll come up with a tech solution, or we'll come up with a scientific solution that'll solve all these problems. And a lot of the challenges, Milwaukee has incredible assets and a rich, complex history, but to come together to really imagine a shared future, we have to understand each other first, and we have to be able to tell our shared vision for the future. And that's at its root a storying challenge. So that, I think, is everyone also, it's a human instinct we have the capacity. Every human being is a storytelling creature. That's who we are as a species. So the average Milwaukeean should care about this because we all have stories. It also is a joyful process. I think sometimes we get a little overwhelmed with our challenges, and we forget about the power and joy at the root of story sharing.
I think I'm reminded of the time in which I was leading the State Association of Food Banks, and one of the things that we really sort of uncovered was this idea that, like, to help people understand folks' experience with poverty was through the art of storytelling, right? Because it gets past people's kind of like guards, as it were, right? To sort of like push or to kind of not believe another person's story. It's hard to not believe a person's story, right? Because it's their own experience. So let's get into the Milwaukee Stories experience. How did this idea bubble up? What's the goal? How does it work? Who's involved?
Well, it bubbled up, I think, in my DNA. Because this is what I've done my whole career is storying, and in various ways, every single kind of way. And I've been doing it forever. 2013, I actually shifted back from running the Center on Aging Community to the Peck School of the Arts, and took all my community partners and sat down and said, how are we going to keep bringing meaningful expression into the lives of older adults? And so we started the Student Artist in Residence program, 2013. And it was a remarkable program that had sometimes 5 to 7 students getting room and board for free as a huge scholarship to be part of community building through the arts and in a long-term care community. So really astonishing, groundbreaking national program. In 2020, I moved from Peck School over to the English department. They have a plan called Public Rhetoric and Community Engagement, which really fit my work and my career really well. And I thought, well, I can't call it student artists in residence anymore. So we expanded the storying part of it and called it the story experience. And then also shifted and expanded the types of partners. So really expanding it only from aging services to a whole life course and a whole range of health and social service organizations that we were working with. So that, and then when I took the helm of the Center for 21st Century Studies in 21, the first thing I did was like talk to 1 million people doing humanities work across the city. And because nobody knew, it was a really kind of not a well-kept secret in like internationally, people knew about the center. But in Milwaukee, it was like, what's that thing? And so I sat down with Drew Kim over at Marquette at the Center for the Advancement of the Humanities. We had great conversations. We're like, why aren't we partnering? And then lo and behold, when the Story Experience course really got kicked into gear, and then this project came around, or this funding opportunity came around, we already had the partnership formed. The Story Experience is a year long, which I like to say the semester is the enemy of community engagement because it actually prioritizes the student's timeline, not the community's timeline. So, and you really can't do much in one semester. You're just getting to know the community partners, and then you have to, somehow do a final project and get out and get a grade. But a year, especially when you back up into the spring before and recruit and meet potential partners and go through this matching system, this matching process, and then you have a retreat in the fall, skill building. You spend 1 month really getting to know the organization, and then you co-create a plan for a story project together. And that is genuine co-creation of knowledge in sort of a Ella Baker, we read a lot about Ella Baker's organizing principles for social justice, and it's a lot about co-creation, co-leadership, bridge leadership. You really learn those communication tools, systems, time management, incredible flexibility, because you just learn to kind of recognize and roll with what's happening. It's just an incredible experience. And then in the spring, you have a culminating celebration of your process and project so far.
Yeah. Um, I want to bring the chancellor back in here really quickly because I'm struck as Anne you're talking that a lot of what happens here on the chancellor's report, Chancellor, is that we talk about really high tech stuff, right? Tech partnerships and like all of the things that is sort of like not anathema, but like different than teaching kids or teaching people how to storytell. And I'm interested in your take here, right? Because I think this is a fascinating thing, given that storytelling is so core to, I think, some of the other things we've talked about, such as leadership and how you move a community forward, right? So in the context of the work of the Chancellor's Report, I think this is a fascinating moment to kind of bring these streams together.
Well, it sure is. And maybe this is one of the best exemplars of what UWM does best and why we continue to focus on the humanities, social sciences, liberal arts as a foundation for all of our students. Because the problem with any tech solution, I mean, there's many of them, but two that come to mind. One is they're limited in terms of their shelf life. We teach today, whether it's engineering or artificial intelligence, or fill in the particular category. And if we don't keep learning, and if we don't understand the work that comes about through a critical perspective, understanding our histories, our stories, the richness of the fuller human experience, we're bound to have in 3 or 5 or sooner a number of years the next issues that we're not seeing if we're just so focused on immediate solution-oriented thinking. So I think that's one particular aspect that's always been a limitation of just a straightforward solutions-oriented education. The other problem that I think we're really seeing post-pandemic is the lack of humanity, the lack of connections. And let me just develop that a little bit. We're more connected digitally than we've ever been before. But I also think whether you walk around campus or you go into office buildings or you think about how absent we are in terms of having what I call the unity in community. We're lacking that. We need these enriching, we need these connective experiences. That to me, that connective tissue is what's truly absolutely missing. And there's an irony here that digitally through social media and other things, we are connected. But what's happened is this divisiveness, I believe, that is enhanced or accelerated by technology, that we have more echo chambers. We don't bridge the divides. And that's what I think the strength of this particular project is. It brings people back together. And again, as a community engaged university, Carnegie recognized we're one of 350 in this country. This is the true exemplar of something that does bring folks together from which we can learn and become better. And when we talk about addressing poverty and root causes, I think Dr. Basin is absolutely right. Let's bring these walls down. And David, to your point, it's hard to deny when you hear the authentic, enriched experiences of individuals. And one final comment, maybe that's the old English major in me that's coming out too, in terms of seeing that more enriched experience. So thanks for asking for my thought on that.
Yeah, of course. So Russell, let's bring you in here. We have MacArthur Genius and the Chancellor University setting them up for you. You're going to knock it down right now. Tell us a little bit about your project in this experience, and what do you hope to accomplish in it?
Yeah, well, first I want to say I did not know that Anne was a MacArthur genius. So
she buries the lead
the entire year. But
we never fail to remind her.
Cool. So I come in. So as you mentioned at the top, so for the last 2 years, so I'm in a 3-year program because I'm doing 2 master's degrees. So for the first 2 years of that program, my funding came through the Center for Economic Development, which is another fantastic interdisciplinary center at UWM that has a program where they basically place students in local community organizations to do, so the nonprofit work. You need to, one of the prerequisites is that you have like a background in like the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps. So you're doing sort of that kind of work. And I was at an organization called the Metropolitan Milwaukee Fair Housing Council, which is currently the only and the longest, for sure the longest fair housing enforcement organization in Milwaukee and also the state. So they do a ton of amazing work. And I was fortunate enough to basically have a 20-hour-a-week position for the last 2 years, helping them look on specifically what I was working on was sort of reinvestment, so fair lending, thinking about like which neighborhoods banks are lending to, and which they aren't, and figuring out how to sort of even the playing field a little bit more. At the same time, I come in, my background is in history, and I was always very interested and passionate about doing community-based research. And there's a lot, as Anne mentioned, there's like so many great opportunities in Milwaukee, people in Milwaukee who are doing great community facing humanities research. And one of the people I worked with last summer was Arijit Sen, who does fantastic work with the Building Landscapes and Culture Field School, has worked with C21, and it's through him that I heard about this program. And when I heard, what the Story Fellows program is, what you do over the course of the year, I was like, this is like the perfect thing to sort of add on to what I'm already doing with the Fair Housing Council, because I sort of again, I'm very historically minded. And what I knew from working with the council is that they, because so much of the work that they do is legal in nature, they do not keep their records for longer than they have to. So there's actually very little historical records available on one of the most important fair housing organizations in the country, and the most important one for Milwaukee. And so that was sort of what led me to decide to do this program. And I guess I was sort of unique in the sense that I was the one who brought the Fair Housing Council into this program. I knew for a lot of reasons that I not only did I not want to do it with anyone else, I also just didn't have the capacity to do it with another organization. So that was sort of how the ball got rolling on that for me.
So in your project as a Story Fellow, in the work that you're doing with the Fair Housing Council, what actually are you doing as a fellow? What's that experience like? And how has this program sort of helped you kind of like bring in all of the things that you're trying to, that you're working on?
Absolutely. So, the first thing I want to sort of just highlight about the program is that no one does the exact same thing.
Right.
In the Story Fellows program. As Anne mentioned, sort of the first month that of the program we do what's called asset mapping, right? We sort of evaluate our organization, figure out what's the actual need, what kind of stories is it possible to collect and share, what's the best method of doing that for this specific context, organizational context that we're in. I was, again, fortunate enough that I had sort of been doing this process on my own for an entire year before I ever, came into this program. And so what I really saw a need for was to do create a collection of long form oral histories. Many of the people who were, the council was founded in 1977, and many of the people who were there at the beginning are still around today in Milwaukee and other places, across the country doing similar work. But unfortunately, the clock's sort of ticking on that. So I sort of felt it was sort of like a now or never thing to sort of try to get some of these stories down for such an important organization. And so that was sort of my main goal, was to sort of create this collection, and everything else I did in the program was sort of in service of making sure, sort of putting a process in place so that could happen.
It's incredible that I'm sort of like getting this kind of like not only the applied work of storytelling, but also the documenting and the preservation, right? It's sort of a dual track. So Anne, there are so Russell's one of the Story Fellows. There are 6 others. Where are they working around the city? Where are they at?
We had Danielle Ippolito, who worked with the Frieden's Food Pantry, which is they were embarking on a big rebranding effort because Frieden's, what is that? They just are changing their name right now. They just landed on it and they'll be launching it in June. And so Danielle got to work with all 4 of their food distribution sites, became the hours she put in was astonished us. The Storyfellows gather every other week to kind of share experiences and troubleshoot challenges. And Danielle would come in and we were all just astonished by how much she had done in her field work.
Yeah, it was insane.
She gathered 75 stories from the clients. And the thing that's incredible about the Friedens is that they have 2,000 volunteers and only about 10 staff. And a lot of their volunteers are actually also clients. So they really create a situation of dignity and generosity and sharing and assets. And she wanted to reflect that in the story sharing that's centered on food and people's experiences with food. So they created a recipe book with 75 interviews. And one of the other things that's both crazy making about this class for the students and also I think really enriching is that I just have a very loose syllabus of the process that we're going to go through, but the design of the course is really responsive to what's emerging in their work in the community, because we don't know what their projects are going to be until they get through the asset mapping and co-creation of the plan process with their mentor. So one of the things we do is bring in, we identify experts who might be helpful to particular challenges that those students and projects are facing. So we brought in some oral history experts, interview people to talk about what happens in certain interview situations, archiving, copyright, all kinds of different things. But pretty much to every last guest, they were love fests for this class structure. Like the guests would all say, "I can't believe this class exists. This is the class I wanted, when I was in school. And I wish I would have had this experience to be able to let these projects unfold over time and be responsive in this way." So there's Danielle, there was Julian Pfeiffer, who was working with the Milwaukee County Parks and their foundation to tell the story of the impact and the experiences of Milwaukee's BIPOC community with the park system. And it was particularly moving, I think, because Julian had such powerful experiences in nature and got a chance to do a podcast, multiple episodes of a podcast about the importance of nature in the parks in his own family. And then also across generations, interviewing the seniors at McGovern Park Senior Center, and then friends and who use the parks as well. So, and then Sahar Merpavar was at Ovation High Point, which Sahar is from Iran, and a very cross-cultural situation, particularly interesting and challenging, and with a lot of potential after October 7th and the outbreak of the war, which I admit, and Russell was in class when I flared up in my concern about how this situation was going to go. And Sahar is permanently joyful person, and said, "Oh, but it's beautiful," because she was doing cross-cultural workshops with at the Jewish Home and Ovation High Point, and said, I simply explained that the Iranian government is not the Iranian people, and that I am in this country because I had difficulty in Iran, And they just embraced each other even further and continued to explore cross-cultural traditions and explore their commonalities and teach her. She was very hungry in her curiosity, which is, I think, one of the core things we really teach in this story experience.
So as we're sort of drawing to an end, we do like to end our show by asking our guests to share something they read or learned recently that they found particularly interesting or inspiring. Russell, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, so the summer term just started up, and I was sort of between, it's like, but when did the fall term or the spring term end? Like two weeks ago. So I've been trying to take it easy on reading a little bit, in between, these two terms. That being said, I have a long running D&D campaign that I DM, and as part of it, it's a long story, but in preparation for a session last week, I was doing a lot of reading of various bits and pieces of Gramsci. And I think that, one of the things that really I've been thinking a lot about with, what he did, first of all, I just think Gramsci is just a really interesting person historically. I mean, there aren't that many philosophers out there who, died in prison, after being imprisoned by like Mussolini, no less. But as I was looking at, a lot of what he was saying, a lot of it very much evoked the story experience for me, and also specifically to what Anne was saying at the beginning, as well as the Chancellor, which is that, Gramsci really believed that in order to sort of bring about the systemic change that I think a lot of us want to see in the world, it's not enough to just propose, policies, care that you have to actually change the stories that people, that we as a society tell about ourselves. And so I think that was sort of what recently has been resonating for me.
That's great. Anne?
Well, I'll tell you, this morning, I read the book that came out of this joint project. I hadn't had a chance to do it yet. Great. And that was the focus of our year, was a press book collaboration with Marquette, where it's called Milwaukee Stories. And we hope it's the first volume. It is a summary and highlights from each of these projects. And it fills me with hope that it's a publicly accessible. It's exactly what I wanted to come out of this project, so that everyone in Milwaukee can take these stories as their own and be part of that shared visioning of a future and part of the change that we want to see.
I love it, Anne, and that you also got in that plug there as good guests do. Chancellor.
I saw this program recently. What would you do? It's kind of like the old days. I'm dating myself, candid camera. But basically here we have John Quinones, who goes around, and the vignette was some immigrant workers who were actors that were applying for jobs in a public setting. And then there was another actor who was berating the employer for even considering these folks who obviously were not American. And what was really interesting and inspiring is how many people came to their rescue. And immigrants sometimes themselves, but people who understood this is the American melting pot, the stories of individuals that they told, and why, when they were interviewed afterward, why did they come to the rescue? That empathy, that human connection, that was so powerful. And I think that's what we're tapping into with the stories that you're hearing about today. So that inspired me.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to the UWM Chancellor's Report. This is David Lee, General Manager at the station. I'm here with Mark Money, Ann Basting, and Russell Starlack. Thank you all so much.
You've been listening to the Chancellor's Report, featuring Mark Money, Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. If you'd like more information, go to uwm.edu/chancellor.